You refer to, I can't remember which book, but you talk about deep listening also.
Deep listening is the kind of listening that can help relieve the suffering of the other person. You can call it compassionate listening. You listen with only one purpose, help him or her to empty his heart. And if you remember that you are helping him or her to suffer less, and then even if he say things full of wrong perceptions, full of bitterness, you are still capable to continue to listen with compassion. Because you know that listening like that, with compassion, you give him or her a chance to suffer less. If you want to help him or her to correct his perception, and then you wait for another time. But for this, the time being, you just listen with compassion and help him or her to suffer less. And 1 hour like that can bring transformation and healing.
So I love this idea of deep listening, because oftentimes when someone comes to you and they want to really vent, they want to purge whatever is going on inside them, people start talking and giving advice. So if you allow the person just to let whatever those feelings are to come out, and then at another time come back to them with your advice or your comments, you would experience a deeper healing. That's what you're saying.
Yes, the fear, the anger, and the despair is born on the ground of wrong perception. And we have wrong perceptions concerning ourselves and the other person. And that is the foundation for conflict and war and violence.
You've said that the only way we can begin to end wars is due to communication between people.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And we should be able to say like this: dear friends, dear people, I know that you suffer a lot. I have not understood enough of your difficulties and suffering. It's not our intention to make you suffer more. It is the opposite. So please tell us about your suffering, your difficulties. I'm eager to learn, to understand. You have to start like that, loving speech. And if you are honest, if you are true, they will open their heart and tell us. And then we practice compassionate, deep listening. And during the process of deep listening, we can learn so much about our own perception and their perceptions. Mm-hmm. And that is the best way, the only way to remove terrorism.
Terrorism, or even difficulties between yourself and
yes.
family members or friends.
Yes.
And the principle is the same no matter the conflict.
Yes.
Terrorists, anti-terrorists,
yes.
father and son,
right.
Yourself and your boss,
right.
Yourself and your children, your best.
Looking at as what I would call deep listening. And it's probably not the way that you typically listen, but it's a very powerful way of listening. And so we're going to take a look at that today. And we're going to begin with a short video. It's an interview of Oprah Winfrey with Thich Nhat Hanh. Now, many of you may know who Thich Nhat Hanh is. I became familiar with Thich Nhat Hanh about 4 or 5 years ago when I read his book called The Miracle of Mindfulness. It was a book that he'd written in 1967, shortly after he had left Vietnam. He was a Buddhist monk in Vietnam, and he was very much into, as were other monks of his group, helping those that were victims of the war. And he did not take sides. He did not take the sides of the North Vietnamese, the communists. He did not take the side of the United States or the Allies. He took the side of the people that were suffering. And that got him in trouble. And so he had to leave Vietnam, and then he came to the United States and now really lives in France, in Plum Village. And so he was interviewed by Oprah Winfrey on the, and this particular segment has to do with deep listening. And I had a chance to do a retreat with Thich Nhat Hanh in August of 2012. And it was really kind of an interesting retreat. It was at St. Catherine's University, which is in Canada, just north of Niagara Falls. And when I went to the retreat, I had the naive assumption that there would just be maybe 100, 200, 300 of us, because I'd gone to these kinds of things before, and typically those were the maximum numbers. But there was nearly 1,000 of us. And they managed this very well, but it was kind of interesting having over 1,000 people sitting on mats meditating in the presence of Thich Nhat Hanh and his company. And he recently, about 6 months ago, had a very serious stroke, and down at the lower part of the brain. And so the prognosis was very, very poor, but apparently he's up, he's moving, he can communicate non-verbally. He still doesn't have the capability of speech, but he's making a remarkable recovery. So anyway, Thich Nhat Hanh, finding a seat that is comfortable and that will facilitate being alert. I invite you now to close your eyes or to gaze gently in front of you. I'll ring the bell once at the beginning, 3 times at the end. Sitting in a comfortable upright position, back straight, neck long, chin slightly down, shoulders relaxed, back, arms gently falling from the shoulders along the sides, hands on the thigh or cupped between the legs, feet flat on the floor, establishing a foundation. The other day I was reminded of a song by a group called Simon and Garfunkel. And they did the soundtrack to a movie called The Graduate. Now for many of you that doesn't mean much, but for some of us it means quite a bit. It was a hugely popular movie in the, I think it was in the 70s, and Sounds of Silence was one of the songs on that track. And so I'd like to invite you now to notice the sounds in this room and the sounds outside this room, to experience the sensation of sound. But perhaps in noticing the sound, you might also notice the silence. Noticing the sound in the foreground and noticing the silence in the background. Simply paying attention to what is there or not. And then bringing the attention to the body, noticing points of contact of the body with the chair and the floor. Perhaps noticing sensation in the bottoms of the hand and the bottoms of the feet as they make contact with the thigh and the floor. Perhaps there is some area of discomfort or tension. Simply taking note of it. And then bringing the attention from sound and from sensations in the body to the breath, to the in-breath and the out-breath. Not ignoring sounds, not ignoring sensations in the body, but choosing to pay attention to the breath, the in-breath and the out-breath. Allowing the breath to breathe. Natural, steady, easy, calm. Paying attention to the breath. Noticing how on the in-breath has a beginning, middle, and end. And how the out-breath has a beginning, middle, and end. Noticing the full length of the breath coming in and going out. Paying attention to the breath. You may have noticed that with the breath, at the end of the in-breath, just before the out-breath, there's a pause, a gap, a moment of stillness. And at the end of the out-breath, just before the in-breath, there's a pause, a gap, a moment of stillness. Noticing the stillness between the breath. Breathing in and breathing out. Allowing the stillness to settle into the body. Perhaps even feeling the breath in the area of the torso, the chest, the upper back, the abdomen, the stomach, the lower back, the sides. Noticing how the breath fills and empties the body. Allowing the qualities of the breath to settle into the body. Steady, easy, calm, still. Anchored in the breath. Paying attention to the breath. The in-breath and the out-breath. Paying attention to whatever comes up around the breath. Noticing the foreground of our awareness, thoughts, feelings, emotions, stories. But when we lose track of the breath and the mind begins to wander, when we're ready, if we choose, we can always come back to the breath. Anytime, any place. For the breath is always present, always now. Simply paying attention to the breath, the in-breath and the out-breath.
I had a strong reaction to it. And I was sad because I'm a mental health counselor. And we're paid to listen to people. But listening for insurance companies is not enough. They want to see some action. And so we have to do something. We have to do besides listen. To satisfy the companies so that they will pay for their clients. And so we do some listening, but a lot of doing. And it's sad. And there's another way. I'm also a spiritual director, and I listen in there, and so I get fulfilled with that. And I see healing occur there as well. And I don't have to take notes. Good. So just an observation.
Thank you, Kathleen. Other thoughts?
I was impressed with how effective it sounds like it would be just to listen to somebody for just to listen, keep listening.
You know, you reach a point in conversation sometimes when you think it's a conversation, you're listening to someone, but there's clues that you can just not talk and keep listening, and was very effective to me here. I can see using that myself in situations.
Mm-hmm. I'm standing over here looking at you. This is my way of saying that I don't want to ignore you. Of course, that could be another way of saying that, come on, it's your turn. Why do I pick on Schrock?
Well, you know.
Maybe it's because we're colleagues, you know, we both teach, I don't know.
So the reaction that I have, and even though I've taught this, I'm sure you've taught it as well, especially in my interpersonal, one-on-one communication class. Especially cover it in terms of, romantic relationships and such, but it applies in any sort of relationship.
Yeah.
The idea that sorry guys, usually it's more of males were kind of socialized to be problem solvers, and that's what we do, and we're right to immediately doing that instead of sometimes listening thoroughly to what's going on and what the other person's expressing. And even though I teach that, and I'm well aware of that fact, it's hard, but it's clearly connected to the mindfulness aspect. I've done that before in conversations with friends where I can catch myself going, wait a minute, I'm prescribing what I think they should do right now, and I need to stop and say, wait, tell me more about that, and probe and ask questions. It's hard to always be mindful of that.
Uh-huh.
I know I have difficulty with silence. So if they pause, I'm in there. And that's the thing that's difficult. It's like, you listen, but they pause, then you want to respond. And sometimes I wonder, do they even think I'm engaged if I just am listening?
Uh-huh, yeah. Yeah. You had a comment?
Oh, excuse me. Before my wife and I were married, we had this marriage prep class at this big church in GR where we ended up getting married. And one of the mentor couples were talking, and the guy said that often his wife would either talk to be listened to or talk to have come up with a fix, like you were just saying. And he said, I have to often, at the beginning of a conversation, just say, wait, is this a listening thing or a fixing thing? And then he would respond accordingly. If it was just a listening thing, he would just listen.
Yeah, get that clarity right up front. Yeah, be clear on what is our intention here? What is the purpose of our conversation? Remember that IIA intention, attention, attitude. Very important to be clear on what our attention is. And then, of course, what attitude we bring to that. And so that gentleman is, from my eyes, doing exactly that. That's wonderful. Yeah. Yeah.
I have grown children, and they'll often call me to talk, and I want to help them problem solve, and they don't want to problem solve. So I'm almost like, why are you bothering to call me? But anyway, they know me. But sometimes they'll say to me very directly, I don't want you to do anything. I don't want you to say anything. I just want you to listen. And that is so difficult, especially as a parent. So.
I think that might be what Darren calls mom disease. My boyfriend calls it mom disease. I've been married a couple times to mothers. And with me, it's like, yeah, you got, some of y'all women, you got mom disease. How's that different, though, than a man who wants to fix things and solve it? I don't think it's a lot different when our kids have an issue, we want to solve it. And yeah, it's very difficult. I just recently got in contact with my daughter who I wasn't able to raise. And I make every effort to be a listener, not an advisor. Kind of not have mom disease for her, and be a friendly hope, because that's all I can be.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? Deep listening.
I have a question, but it's kind of off topic. Are you reading Untethered Soul?
Me?
Yeah.
I just got it. I haven't read it yet.
You're going to love it. You're going to love it. I highly recommend that book to
Really?
everybody. Yes. The first part 1, is just, it's mindfulness.
Good.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Did Oprah recommend it?
It's an Oprah book. See that?
Is it? Yeah, Oprah recommendation? Oh, okay.
I don't think so.
Well, deep listening is really different than the way we typically do listening, isn't it? I mean, we know about things like active listening, okay? But that means active, that means talking. And we certainly know about advice giving. And I think we'd all agree, even those of us that give advice, that we give way too much advice. You know, and when we give people advice, we really oftentimes deny them the opportunity to come up with their own solutions, make their own discoveries, work through their own problems, learn from their mistakes. So as valuable as advice giving it is, it has some real limitations as well. And in fact, Americans, they did a survey, and I don't know who did it, so this is kind of like unofficial fact, is that Americans are the most advice-giving culture in the world. And we're the most opinionated.
No.
I guess that doesn't surprise anyone, does it?
It does. I would give it to like Italians from
What, for being opinionated?
and advice giving.
Oh, okay.
Just from my brief experience in
Yeah,
Italy.
yeah. So there's advice giving has an upside and a downside, doesn't it? But we're talking about a different kind of listening here. We're talking about a listening that can really, really have powerful effects. You know, we're talking about something to where someone can experience something on a very, very deep level. And I passed around to you a handout on limbic resonance. And the idea behind this is that, well, first of all, let me tell you about the work of a fellow named Siegelman. He's been looking at mindfulness and this thing called limbic resonance for about 10 years. And what he has found in his research, that when people are communicating interpersonally, they have resonance in their brain. That if we are synced up, that we will have the same parts of our brains will be activated, okay? And that what we tend to do is we tend to maintain a synchrony. So if one person's resonance changes, then the other person's resonance will make an adjustment. So there's this kind of synchrony, this kind of lining up and kind of thing. Well, the really cool thing about that is that one person's resonance, let's say it's the preferred resonance, can have an impact on the least preferred resonance, and then that person's brain will, in a sense, kind of sync up with them. Now, we've known for years that when it comes to nonverbal behavior, that there's a synchrony effect. So what happens is when I'm communicating with others, we will have this synchrony. We will play off of each other as if it were a dance. We were in this dance together, and we're dancing in a very compatible way. And I remember when I was first really was aware of that was in my graduate program, and I had the opportunity to, as part of my work, look at videotapes of family therapy and the way in which the therapist would work with the husband, the wife, and the kids and get in the synchrony. So I remember the wife, in the one case, she was all closed up like this, and what he did, because he was a dominant husband, okay, he had the wife sitting closest to him, okay, and they were at about a 90-degree angle, which is ideal, okay, and then there was the kids and the husband. He was way down at the end. That was on purpose, because the seat of power is right here. And so he's interacting with her, okay, and what she was closed off like this, kind of, and what he did is he slowly moved an arm down like this. She did the same, and over the course of 10 minutes or so, they moved from literally being closed to being open. Now, he used language too, okay, but there was a nonverbal synchrony, and we know now that there's even more than that. There was probably a brain resonance. And so when we are fully present with another person, and if they are present with us, there is a resonance there that can be really, really quite powerful. There's a deep connection on a neurological level. We are not just connected to people in terms of ideas. We're not just connected to people in terms of psychology or emotions. That's powerful, it's real, okay? And certainly when we touch someone, we have that level of connection, but there is a neurological connection. And that's what deep listening offers us. And I know I gave you that handout, but I do want to read it to you just to reinforce it. You do have it in front of you. Limbic resonance is the theory that the capacity for sharing deep emotional states arise from the limbic system of the brain. These states include the dopamine circuit promoted feelings of empathic harmony, In the norepinephrine circuit originated emotional states of fear, anxiety, and anger. So we can feel pleasant feelings, unpleasant feelings. Okay. The concept was advanced in a book, A General Theory of Love, and is one of 3 interrelated concepts central to the book's premise, that our brain chemistry and nervous systems are immeasurably affected by those closest to us, limbic resonance, that our systems synchronize with one another in a way that has profound implications for personality and lifelong emotional health, and that these patterns can be modified through therapeutic practice, mindfulness, through mindfulness. In other words, it refers to the capacity for empathy and nonverbal connection that is present in mammals, and it forms the basis of our social connections as well as the foundation for various modes of therapy and healing. According to the authors, our nervous systems are not self-contained, but rather demonstrably attuned to those around us with whom we share a close connection. Okay, within the effulgence of the new brain, mammals developed a capacity we call limbic resonance, a symphony of mutual exchange and internal adaptation whereby 2 mammals become attuned to each other's inner states. We really can be there for another person. And it's not an intellectual thing, it's not a thinking thing, it's not a doing thing, it's a being thing. Deep listening happens when we can be with another person, and ideally when they can be with us. And so the question is, how do we go about creating a container that encourages that? And to that end, what can I do within that container that's going to help me to be mindful? And I do have a suggestion, but I did see a question, so I'll field that first.
I do.
Okay.
When you read this, or when you read this to us, I would at first think that it would be someone you have a longer relationship with, someone you work with, someone you live with. But could this happen when I think about situations where you're at a store, right? And you've just met this person and the interaction gets into conflict, meaning you're returning something or something. But if the person is listening to you and you can tell they're listening, for me anyway, it relaxes me. It'll allow me to say, okay, maybe you can't do anything, but you're at least listening. Is that related to that too?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes, and actually you're giving me, that's kind of the direction in which we're headed.
Okay.
That the researchers tell us, we know this, there was a guy named Morabian, and he was the first to really identify this, 30, 40 years ago. But we know that in communication, anywhere to 60 to 80% of the meaning in any communication comes through the nonverbal communication. That means that even when I'm using words like I am now, that most of the real meaning is not in the words, it's in the nonverbal. Now the nonverbal includes an awful lot, doesn't it? First and foremost, nonverbal includes the way in which we say the words, how the words are said. And we know from research and from our own experience that we can really do a good job of communicating and inferring feeling, tone, attitudes from the voice. No, it's not a problem. The words say it's not a problem, but the voice makes it clear that it is a problem. And we're very, very good at that. We can make that distinction. And people that are really good at passive-aggressive do a lot of this stuff. But so that's one. And of course, there's facial gestures, the eyes, and the lips and the face. In fact, there's a guy named Ekman who has spent 40 years researching micro-movements of the eyes. And with his particular method, he can tell with pretty much near certainty whether you're lying, whether you're telling the truth, what you're feeling. And people that are trained in that method are pretty incredible. He works with border guards and secret agents and all that kind of thing. And interestingly, recently completed a book with the Dalai Lama, which is interesting. I just started reading it, but I'm looking at that intersection between the work he's doing and some of the the underlying Buddhist ideas. But there's a lot to the face. In fact, there was a guy at the turn of the century, I think his name was Del Sart. He identified, I don't know why he went to this trouble, 1,000 micro movements of the mouth, like it matters. But the point is he found that there were differences. But of course, we have the things we do with our hands and our arms and our legs, and all of this together, including context, really tells us how to interpret the words, what they mean. But most important of all, I suppose, is that if you really want to know how a person feels, if you really want to know what their attitude is, it's going to be in their nonverbal. It's going to be expressed in their movement, or it's going to be expressed in their voice. So, and that's really coming from out of that resonance, you might say. So, what can I do then to be present, and what can I do to be really tuned into the other person? Number one is to sit in silence, the hardest thing to do. What I really want to do is to be present with my desire, my anxiety to talk. But my intention at the beginning of this conversation was to do deep listening. My question was, so to do deep listening, I am going to just listen. I'm not going to talk, okay? And so I am going to be present to my experience, and I will notice these things, desires and stuff. But how do I remember to pay attention? I suggest that tune into the other person's nonverbal. Watch their face, listen to their voice. And then notice all the interpretation and everything that comes up in your mind, stuff that comes up in your body. It's really quite remarkable. I've done this now a number of times, but it's really interesting to sit down with someone and just let them talk. And talk for like 15, 20 minutes, and all you do is listen. And then at the end of that time, then you get a chance to paraphrase back. And it's amazing how much you remember. But most of all, you are aware of you and all of your reactions. Okay, so in a listening situation, this is the ideal. Remember that whole messages thing where we talked about to have, if we really want to have clarity, accuracy, precision, significance, okay, that if we have whole messages where I talk about what it is, the event, okay, if I share with you what's going on in my body, if I share with you my thoughts, I share with my feelings, I share with my wants, okay? It's all out on the table. There's no mystery, okay? So what that then is what I want to do is I'm mindful of what am I thinking, what am I feeling, what's going on in my body. And as I maintain this quality of mindfulness, I can feel the push and pull of all these different things. How I want to do this, I want to do that. But all along, my intention is what? To simply listen. It is not easy. But what happens is we can start to feel each other. And that's what Sigelman was talking about in his work. Okay? Now I know a lot of it sounds theoretical, but think about those times you've been deeply connected to another person. You know, maybe you would use different language, but did you experience real empathy? Mm-hmm. Did you feel that person really was with you, understood you, felt you? You felt them. You've been there, you've done that. This is what we're talking about being mindful to it. So my question to you is that, okay, I'm going to make an assumption here. I'm going to assume that all of us would like to bring more of this into our important relationships, to where we really are heard and the other person is heard. And so we're assuming, of course, that the other person is open to this and would want to be mindful, and we want to be mindful. So we really need to provide a mindful container. So if you were to take this home, what are some things that you could do with your relationships that you could help to start this container? What would that look like?
Let me use props. And being face to face with the person, like sitting on the couch, maybe facing each other, and just not having any distractions around you, and just being in a room and sitting there and really actually caring to listen to every word and to just...
But what if you're dealing with someone, okay, so I'm going to make an assumption, we're going to pretend. Let's say you have a boyfriend, okay, and you're all on board. I know you've been doing your mindfulness thing and you've been doing your homework, and that's great, but your boyfriend goes, But he's going to go along with it because he loves you and he wants to please you, and so he's going to go along with it. But man, this anxiety, as soon as there's quiet, he's anxious. He wants to talk. He wants to get out of there. He wants to give advice. Okay? And so what do you do about that? Because that situation is going to be one that we're all going to face.
I mean, yeah, because I could be the girlfriend that feels that same way, because it's instinct. It's just how it is. But you could just be like, I appreciate you approaching the situation like that, but could you just listen in like whatever, like could you listen, because this is, I want you to understand this. I want you to understand how I'm feeling. I want you to understand that I am sad, or I am hurt, or whatever it is, and just be like, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but could you just listen and be with me?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I was going to say in that situation too, you could be an example of mindfulness and listen to him as to why this makes him anxious, why does the silence make him nervous, so really listening to him and understanding why and listening, letting him vent about being uncomfortable.
Wow, did you catch that? So maybe what I could do is say, hey, I want to talk to you about some stuff, but I need to know how you feel about this. Is it gonna, and so then it's a chance for you to model it with mindful listening. Yeah, that's a very good point. We always have to practice what we preach, right? Right. And we do lead by example. And the interesting thing about mindfulness or anything, at least from where I come theoretically, is that any real change begins with a change in me. And so my circumstances only change when I change, because even if they don't change, since I'm changed, they're better. Things always get better when I change, regardless of what my circumstances are. But if my sense of well-being is somehow tied to my circumstances, I'm in a bad situation. Okay? So yes, that is terrific, guys. Wow. Any other thoughts? Bringing it into the home. Having that talk. How about the kids?
Kids can be difficult because, we're the authority. So it's the power differential there. Especially when you have young, like my kids are younger. So I don't know how I would help our kids.
Well, I have someone who comes to the mindfulness labs, and I'm not going to mention her name, but I don't think she'd mind me sharing this. She's been dealing with issues with her teenage daughter. And what she found is in being mindful, she's much more aware of her tendency to react. She's much more aware of her tendency to advise, to be codependent. And so her mindfulness has given her some choices that she didn't have. She has that pause. She has that moment of awareness where she can choose to act differently. And it's really messing with her daughter in a good way. Okay? And her daughter actually thanked her. She grudgingly likes it, I think. So what mindfulness does, it gives us choices that we might not otherwise have. I take a moment, I pause, I become mindful. What is going on with my thoughts, my feelings, what's happening in my body? What are my tendencies right now? And that's the quality when we bring into that listening and that interaction. It's not easy. We're constantly going back to mindlessness and then coming back to mindfulness.
And that's exactly.
Please, there's no interrupting here.
One of the major things I've really learned in this class is
Uh-huh.
how much mindlessness I actually have. I mean, I already knew that I need to be a more conscious driver instead of a subconscious driver, and paying attention to regular life and the things I do that I do subconsciously for so many years. You do something enough and you can do it without actually knowing you were doing it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, mindfulness instead of mindlessness and bringing myself back to a more focused me.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the biggest things I've learned in this class, really.
Oh, that's great. That's awesome. If I'm going to sit down with someone, I'm going to have a meeting, or I'm going to sit down to have a talk with someone important to me. Remember that one video way back when, the 60 Minutes interview? And then they showed Google, and they talked to a couple of executives of Google. And remember the woman who said that, yeah, typically we start our meetings with 1 to 2 minutes of silent meditation? 1 minute. What are we doing? We're taking the time to create a container. We're taking the time to be present to myself, and when I'm present to myself, then I will be present to others. We know it's a neurological phenomena, it's limbic resonance, we know it's a psychological phenomena, but regardless of what the explanation is, we can't make that connection, not a deep connection, unless I'm present and you're present. And at least if I'm present, even if you're not, I can still have empathy for you. I can still sense your suffering. I can still move compassionately to you. But if I'm not in touch with my own discomfort, my own distress, and stuff like that, then I'm going to be moving out of reactive patterns rather than responding out of awareness. Does that kind of make sense? That's really what we're talking about. Mindfulness, awareness gives us more choice. It's really about having more choices. And we were talking earlier about how sometimes we forget to be mindful, but then we eventually come back to it. What is the draw of mindfulness? Once we become mindful, once we experience mindfulness, we kind of like it. You know, and we want a little bit more of it. But it does take some commitment to get it going, to get it started.
It's almost like the difference between real flowers and fake ones. You start smelling the roses better when you stop and actually think about it.
And I like that. I like roses because as beautiful as roses are, sometimes you get your finger pricked. My dad used to grow roses. We grew up in California, and beautiful rose weather. And we had roses all over the place. And the great thing about roses is they're so beautiful and so incredibly fragrant. But you can also get hit by those thorns and the occasional bumblebee that's there. Because that's kind of like, you know, when John Kabat-Zinn named his book Full Catastrophic Living, I mean, he really captured, I think, what life is all about. You know, it's all of it. You know, there's the pleasant, there's the unpleasant, you know, there's that we like, we don't like, but it's all part of the same thing, you know, and the idea is just to be present to all of it as best we can. And out of that we can make better choices. So how do we bring it on home? That's always the biggest challenge. Well, I think somebody already hit on that, and that's what can I do? How can I be mindful? You know, and as I go about life mindfully, as more aware, make better choices, then perhaps those around me might be drawn to it as well.
Time for quick stories?
You got a lot of time for a quick story.
So one of the favorite stories to share in class, again, same class, talking about the idea, I think ties a lot of themes together in terms of your choice. Whatever your background is in terms of how you saw things done, you can always kind of change that and kind of make it your own. This was a former instructor of mine when he was in high school dating somebody. Went to pick her up from her house. On their way out, they walk by the living room and see her mom and dad sitting knee to knee, hand in hand, talking softly. And he walks by and, what's going on? What are your parents doing? Oh, we can't, they're fighting. They're what? and he said that's basically just the rules that they kind of agreed upon. And just saying that we feel that connection, we're close to each other. Unlikely one of us is going to leave or yell, or it's not really a problem if a kid is in the area, you know, that idea. In a lot of ways, it's really, really good things. And he, you know, thinks that's maybe strange or weird, but again, saying regardless of what kind of your history in terms of how you saw those things dealt with or whatever, this is your life. You can just choose what you want in terms of making your environment what you will, but you have to be purposeful about it. And think, like you say, kind of making a space or just saying, this is beneficial for all these reasons. I kind of like that one just because, again, it just kind of demonstrates the idea of it's up to you. I mean, whatever you want your reality to be, you can be purposeful about it.
I forget his first name, but his name is Gottman. He is the premier researcher, has been for 40 years on marriage. And he can spend 20 minutes with you and he can predict with 95% certainty whether your marriage will last or not. And why everybody in the world that is getting married doesn't go to see Gottman or use his method, I don't know. But what's really interesting is the key to a successful marriage isn't that you have certain good behaviors, it's the absence of a certain set of bad behaviors. If you have, and one of those is ridicule, okay? He calls them the 4 horsemen. So it's the absence of those that makes for a good marriage. It's not the performance of a certain set of skills, because he's looked at thousands and thousands of marriages and the way in which couples do conflict and work through problems, and he found that has nothing to do with whether they have good communication skills or good. It varies from one to the next. The thing they have in common is they're not doing the bad stuff. Okay? So what does that have to do with mindfulness? So being aware of what's going on with me positions me in a position to choose. And I will recognize those things more likely. So it isn't so much trying to do the right thing, that's important, but it's avoiding doing the bad stuff that destroys the marriage in the first place, or any relationship. And it's certainly a journey, and it isn't easy, because I know a lot of times, you know, when my wife and I get in conflict, the best thing I can do is go, well, I'm really angry. I think I'll pick up and do this again later, you know, which is sometimes the smartest thing to do, isn't it? Because it can really, really escalate. But we can't do that if we're not aware. Okay, I want to thank you all for being here. We will be resuming this series in the fall, and so if you have any ideas on how to do for topics or things like that, also we're going to be setting up a page either in the library or at the center to where you can access all the information that we are using in this, and I will for sure send out one more letter. Thank you all for being here. Yeah.